This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 4 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland. I'm delighted to be joined today by James Wilson, aka the Sleep Geek. James, thank you for joining us on the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, this is, I'm really looking forward to this next 45 minutes or so because this is such an important topic, crops up all the time when I'm out and about in the world of sport. But just to start with, James, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and some of the organisations that you work with and your story, I guess, to date so far?
Yeah, so I'm a sleep behaviour and environment expert. I work generally as a sleep practitioner. I've worked with kids. I started my career working with children with a children's sleep charity, and then and particularly specialised in teenagers with the charity. Did some additional adult training around CBTI, and day to day I work with organisations and sports teams generally. So working with cultures, often trying to get sleep embedded in cultures that sometimes maybe sleep is not the main priority in those cultures, and I'm there to try and see how we can help the organisation, the sports team, or the individual sort of work out themselves, because I think it's all about the individual, this stuff. So I work with people in the organisation side. I work with people like Zurich Insurance, Pret a Manger, Red Bull, Coca-Cola Hellenic, who are the bottling company for Coca-Cola. I've worked with a couple of governments, worked with the UAE government and the government in the Isle of Man. And within sports, I originally I worked in football. I worked with Rotherham United for quite a long time, 4 or 5 years, going in and out of there. I'm a Rotherham fan, and I'll talk a little bit about I have been a teenage athlete. I was an academy player at Rotherham for not very long. My sleep was appalling, in all honesty. I can still remember the fear and the sort of not sleeping at night and just laying in bed all day just because training. And I was sort of 15 when I was there. I was there for months rather than a considerable amount of time. But I was the son of a ex-professional footballer. So in terms of parents and my dad had sort of had we'd had a short professional career. His probably biggest claim to fame was he was sacked by Tommy Docherty when he was manager of Rotherham, the ex Scotland and Man United manager, and we still booed him when he came on telly until the day he died, because according to my dad, he told my dad he told the Daily Mirror that my dad had played for England, and then 3 weeks later sacked him for having weak ankles. So it was not well loved in our house. So I have a lot of empathy with some of the young athletes I work with. So I work with Rotherham, I've worked with Lincoln City, worked with Sheffield United. I talk about my 5 promotions and 1 cup win in that time with those clubs. This season, I'm West Ham sleep expert, so I work with across the club, both men's and women's, and supporting all aspects of the club. So when I work with organisations or sports teams, it's about everyone getting that sleep advice. It doesn't, to me, if you're in that organisation, we often focus on the athlete, but actually for coaches, you need to be sleeping properly. For support staff, they need to be sleeping properly, and I think for parents of young elite athletes, they need to be sleeping properly. I also work with Sports Aid, where I know you probably know quite well. I'm their sleep expert, so I support the athletes coming through Sports Aid, which I think is a great, for me in terms of my practitioner career, is brilliant because I'm working with lots of different sports, lots of different sort of age groups from sort of 10, 11, with some of the power athletes into sort of mid-20s, late 20s, and that teaches me a lot about about the different pressures different sports upon people, and how different governing bodies or different teams have different cultures, and you have to I'm part of a performance team. I'm not there, like, it's not about sleep being perfect because we're in environments where sleep is difficult to get perfect sleep. It's about how do we support these athletes to get the best sleep they can, and that is often my focus.
Brilliant. Well, we're not going to get a lot of perfection, are we? We're certainly not perfect sports parents, and lots of us acknowledge that now, even if we sort of know what we're trying to do. But I think this is one that we can certainly pick a few bones out of. So sleep's obviously important for everyone. It's particularly important, I think, for young people in their development, and certainly people who are involved in sport. So what are the benefits just generally in terms of sleeping well? What should we expect to see, and why should it be a priority, as you say, embedding it, across a whole culture?
I think so. Sleep is foundational in terms of our mental and physical well-being and health. So we're sleeping well. The world is easier to deal with. If we're going to simplify it, that's what it comes down to. But when it comes to sleep and what it provides us during deep sleep, during slow wave sleep, during also known as non-REM 3 sleep, we're physically recovering. So when as athletes, when we've performed or we're tired and our muscles need to do a little bit of repair, this happens during deep sleep. Normally, the early stages of the night. And deep sleep is that stage of sleep where if you woke from it, you feel very groggy. You may sleep through a fire alarm. That's deep sleep. You might sleep through burglar alarm going off down the street. That's deep sleep. You might sleep through your kids when they were younger shouting out in the night. That's how the deep sleep we're lagging. It is one or the other. But deep sleep is that stage of sleep where it's very difficult to rouse us. And we are most of its work is generally is physical recovery. There are 4 stages of sleep. 2 of the stages are more like interconnected sleep, and they generally make up about 60% of our sleep. So non-REM 1 and non-REM 2 stages of sleep, which are more like, or which can be known as light sleep, they're connecting deep sleep and another important stage of sleep, REM sleep. And in REM sleep is where we build emotional resilience. It's where our brain goes through an overnight counselling session where we work through the emotion of the previous day. And so what we saw during lockdown, for example, is people having more vivid dreams, remembering their dreams more. And this was because stressful situation that our bodies aren't used to, and therefore in the night your brain was probably working harder to work through the emotions around that situation. So that happens during REM sleep. REM sleep is also where we file ideas, routines, things from the day before that are important. So if you are an athlete, if your sport involves learning a routine, REM sleep is very important to that. REM sleep contributes to our ability to make decisions in the moment. It builds that emotional resilience. And I think if we all think about when we don't get sleep, we see how REM sleep is affected, because REM sleep happens later in the sleep cycle, and is also it's easier to wake us up during REM sleep. So if we are sleeping poorly, it's more likely that it's REM sleep that we're not getting. And we see this. So if you have slept poorly, your ability to manage your emotions is a lot more difficult. You are more likely to lose your temper, really. So you might slept well, can deal with the world around us. And you see this with coaches. I think often coaches are a good example in the public domain that we see, where people actually they're not dealing with emotions very well, and it's because they're not slept well. Because you watch press conferences sometimes, and coaches and managers can say some very strange things and actually lose their temper, and that's because they've not had enough REM sleep. As individuals, you're slept poorly, you're waiting for someone to come at you, your kids, your partner, your colleagues, random strangers walking down the street. You are ready to blow, and I think that's where sleep is foundational, both physically and mentally. So, and it's about meeting our individual sleep needs. So there's a lot of prescription in sleep, and I think if we're thinking about sleep, we need to think about sleep as being closer to our mental health in terms of how we address it, rather than say exercise or diet, because we can't force sleep, and there is no magic number for how much sleep we need. We are all different, and sleep need is not just how much, it's also how good. And this is some of the problems that we come across in sport, that we try and address it in a very prescriptive way, and we create stories around sleep that sounds, intuitively sound correct, but actually are more likely to damage the athletes, young or old, that we are working with. And I think that's probably the difference in general population sport, where sleep is sleep is some of the messaging around sleep within sport is, to be blunt, wrong. And that isn't helping the athletes we support, whether we're a parent or we're a coach.
Yeah, no, as you say, that doesn't help anybody, does it? Because it doesn't help the athletes, but then it's really confusing for parents in particular, who we hear a lot from about, working with their kids around sleep and the challenges that we all face on that. And that's something we'll come on to later. So I mean, there's so much in there about the importance of quality sleep, and I'm sure all our listeners can recognise a number of those scenarios that you've alluded to in our own personal lives. Those moments when we feel, or when we wake up and we know, I guess we know subconsciously what the sleep's been like, but we've never really particularly thought about it and thought about the impact on our actions. How do we make young people recognise the importance of good sleep? Now, obviously not when to go to bed, but how do we get them to understand that it's a really important part of them developing, particularly if we're, you think of some of the environments both you and I in, we're working with very young athletes in some cases, football academies, gymnastics, swimming, very hard trying to explain to a 9, 10, 11-year-old, the importance of it, because they just don't get it. They don't need to think like that. Probably neither do the teenagers for that point, but we'll come on to them later.
I think it is. It's really simplifying the message, because sleeping in just to a sense is quite simple. This isn't like nutrition where there's a million and one recipes or training where there's a different routine, and we have to. It's very, very simple. It's taking it back to this sort of understand. It's part of understanding yourself as a human and as an athlete. So I think it is. It's so I do this job because I'm a poor sleeper, like genetically. So we inherit sleep, and I inherited it from my family. My family made mattresses, so I was a poor sleeper who sold mattresses, and that's where I started, because we employed sleep experts who were useless, who were telling me that it was my fault, and it was prescriptive, and it was like, well, I'm a doctor and you're an idiot. It was that kind of like just pomposity when explaining to poor sleepers what was going on. So I think the more we can break it down and simplify it, and I work a lot in schools as well as within sport, and I think it's taking it back to that, like, about feeling. Sleep is not a number. Being sleepy is not, I need to be, it's 10 o'clock, so I need to be in bed. Sleepiness is a feeling. So it's actually those younger kids, it's talking about like what sleepiness feels like. Because we all know, I think we've all been children, and we've all had, probably most people listening to this podcast will have had children, and we know how hard it is to staying up is somehow seen as a sign of age or experience or a badge of honor that we can stay up later. And I think, I know with I've got 3 kids, and with my kids it is about explaining that sleep's really important. Sleep's brilliant. They do roll their eyes a little bit when I start talking about it, but it is from a very young age. Dark is good. I think there's a lot of we are designed to be anxious at night, because as an animal, when we have predators, we were more vulnerable at night. So our whole body, you feel anxiety more in the night. The wardrobe monsters are bigger in the middle of the night for us as adults. Not just for kids. But I think starting to have those conversations that dark is good, sleep is important to us functioning well. But it's difficult because those messages aren't in schools in the same way that healthy eating maybe is. It's not in school in the same way that exercise is. And I think I feel that sleep is as important as diet and sleep are your 2 main recovery tools. And I think if we get those right, doing our lives become easier, our sports become easier. So I think the more we can simplify the messages, make it sleeping in simple form, which is why it's good for you. And then actually to fall asleep, you need to be relaxed, and you need to be cooler, and you need to understand yourself. So for example, like sleep type, chronotype. We all have heard of larks and owls, but we don't really understand what that means, because it's not you're either a lark or an owl. It's actually a line from early types to late types, and we all sit on that line somewhere. And actually, most of us sit on that line somewhere in the middle, with a slight preference one way or the other. Apart from teenagers, which is some of the anyone working with teenagers knows, or living with teenagers, they're a little bit later. But if we target a bedtime for our children that does not fit their body's natural rhythm, no matter how old they are, whether they're from probably 12 weeks in, these things start to solidify in them. It's really difficult. If you're a late type and you are going to bed too early, you just won't fall asleep. No matter what magic tracks you're listening to, what lavender you're smelling, no matter what, whether you're listening to Calm or Headspace, or you've meditated for 25 minutes, or you've got to work with your body's natural rhythm. So I think the more we can help younger children understand that, so we simplify it. Are you a good or poor sleeper? What's your sleep type? How much sleep do you need in terms of how much and how good? When we get people to think about that, you then everything comes from that starting point when it comes to sleep. Who the child is as a sleeper.
Yeah. Do you think modern society and the way life is, and obviously again we'll get onto this with the teenagers piece later, but this stuff around use of devices, technology, all those bits that come along, not just during the course of the day, but obviously throughout the course of an evening as well. Do you think that's led to a reduction in the quality of sleep across society, or is that just a bit, is that a bit far-flung as a statement, or do you think there is more poor sleep than maybe in the past?
I think sleep expertise wants us to believe sometimes that that sleep problem started in 2006 with the invention of the iPhone. In all honesty, I think we put too much emphasis on it being the device's fault, because I think previous to that, I know I'm 42. The problem with them was everyone had a TV in the room.
Yeah,
and exactly sort of the same thing. I was watching things that were maybe not appropriate.
And the computer games on till midnight because you fancied like a game on the old keyboards, the Sync Spectrum. So, absolutely. Yeah.
So before that, it was radio. If I talked to my daddy, we're listening to Wolves versus some Honved under his duvet in like the late 1950s.
Yeah,
it isn't the device's fault. It's the choices that we make, and I think actually we're better off helping our children make the right choices, because I've worked a lot with teenagers, and the pushback I get from teenagers, and I've probably been working with them now nearly 10 years, is as parents gave us this device at 5 to shut us up, and now when we're 15 they're telling us that we can't use it for an hour before bed. What are we supposed to do? Because our whole consumption of content comes through these devices. So a lot of my work with teenagers is more what's appropriate to watch before bed, something funny, something repetitive, something a bit trashy, rather than something that's not appropriate, something that's that is like a horror film or a box set or a crime drama or mindlessly scrolling. It's about choices, it's about choices. And I think if we can teach our teenagers to make better choices, then because they're going to use the device, and that's not just them, that's us as well. Because I go into organisations, and when I do the who doesn't use their device in the hour before bed, you'll get one person put their hand up, brilliant, they've got far better willpower than the other 100 people in the room. But we don't do it. So actually, as an expert, I think giving advice that nobody actually listens to makes you a bit not needed as an expert. I think we have to try and help people make better choices around what they're consuming, whether actually it's on your device, or whether it's on a TV, or whether it's a book, or whether it's listening. Performance podcasts are a bane of my life within a performance environment, because everyone thinks that the right time to listen to a performance podcast is just before bed. And if your job involves performing at elite level, listening to other elite performers talk about performing at elite level is not going to help you sleep well. So I think it's more about choices. So I try and support the athletes I work with, help parents understand that it's about helping them make choices. So, for example, I've got a 15-year-old in our house. Up until an hour and a half before bed, you can do what you want, but for an hour and a half, we consume together. So we'll watch something on telly. That means that me, his mum, and my stepson together, we watch something that relaxes us, drops our heart rate, makes us feel relaxed. Not something funny, something a bit trashy. We're all big fans of Married at First Sight UK. Things like that, that your brain just starts to switch off. It's better to take that approach than say don't do this, because I think I'm a big fan of tiny habitual changes. I think particularly for the audiences that I work with in sport, it's easier to make a small change than it is to start like not using your phone before bed. It's great if you can do that. In my experience of working with hundreds of thousands of poor sleepers, not many of them achieve that long term.
Yeah, and I think that sort of teenage period where, maybe when they're a little bit younger than that, we do have a greater sense of control, in so much that I think back and it's like, no, actually that's going in there, it's not going in your room, that's how it's got to be. You've got into that routine from a young age. But I do, however, now have to admit that is getting more and more of a challenge. And of course the TV request has now come in ahead of Christmas, or a projector or something that allows something in the room, which up until this stage we've managed to avoid. But again, that, as you say, it still goes back to that body rhythm, and it certainly makes sense. I think of my own 13-year-old in particular, who does have his device taken off him, well before bed. You try to watch something with him, but then he's still scratching around 2 hours later, and you can hear him. It's going on, bringing it onto the teenage piece, I think then is, so they're going to bed way later than most parents would think it's good for them to go to bed to, because I think we just do, whether that's right or wrong or not. I think that's just the way we see the world. But then, of course, I'm pretty comfortable with that. That doesn't bother me necessarily. It's then obviously that you can't wake them up. And then you get frustrated with the kid. But then if you know a bit more, you get frustrated with the sector in general, because then if we know that, why is that a good idea to be working on the timeframes we all have to work under? So what do? Let's talk teenagers. Let's talk trying to explain to parents now the changes that teenagers go through. Let's try and find some solutions based on the fact there are some things we can't actually control. So how do we make the best of it?
So I think I feel for teenagers, and I think I've worked with more teenagers than anybody else in the country on sleep, and it's not their fault. We have a world that doesn't work with their natural rhythm. About between sort of as probably our kids get to the end of year 6, they start to show probably a little bit more later tendency. So you start moving towards a more on that line. You're starting to move along the line towards the late type, towards the owls. And between probably 13 and mid-20s, we're more likely to be a late type, more likely to have owlish tendencies. If we generalize it, we'd say that's probably going to bed after 11 and getting up after 8. But we know that school doesn't allow that. So the actual biggest problem for many teenagers is the school start time does not work with their body's natural rhythm. Now, in sport, we have another issue on top of that. And you mentioned sort of swimming earlier and diving. Those sports, often people get up at 5:15 in the morning to go training, which, you know, to show how that will be us as sort of adults. So I'm 42. You'd be like me at 42, getting up at 3:30 because the way their bodies are shifted in terms of their body clock, we're actually waking them up at equivalent of I think the research was based on a 55-year-old man, a 55-year-old man getting up at 3:30 in the morning. So no, even if you're the earliest of early types, you know, you get up at 3:30 is always going to. I appear on morning TV enough to know that morning TV presenters are not big fans of waking up at 3:30 to get to the studio, and I don't think any of us would be. So I think we need to have a bit more empathy for our teams, because it's not their fault. But this is where the problem lies, because actually, when it comes to sleep, we can wake up at a consistent time. That's not difficult because we can set an alarm.
Yeah.
Where actually going to sleep at a consistent time there's not a human alive who can go to sleep every night at the same time. And that's where if you ever, and this is quite prevalent in sport, it's one of the biggest myths and issues I come up against is this sort of like 90-minute cycle theory of if you want 9 hours sleep and you get up at 7:30, count back 90-minute cycles and you go to bed at 10:30. If you fall asleep at 10:30, then you wake up at 7:30 and you just wake up and you wake up singing Morning's Broken and everything's hunky-dory. And I was talking to someone who's responsible for wellbeing in a football academy in the last 2 weeks, and they've had wellbeing training that taught them that theory, and that theory is wrong. And that's some of the issue, that we think we can control sleep at sleep time. And we're then saying, well, you need to get up at 5:15, so you're going to have to go to bed at 8:15 or 9 is probably the norm for a young athlete. Getting up at 5:15, and they're late types. That is so far from their body's natural rhythm that will be incredibly difficult. And what happens is, after about 15 minutes, half an hour of laying in bed, we start to feel more stressed and anxious. Our cortisol adrenaline levels rise. Our bodies are designed to not feel sleepy when we are in fight or flight mode. It makes sense when we had predators, when saber-toothed tigers are chasing us. The last thing you want to be is asleep. So your body reacts to, and in fact, we're quite unique as an animal in doing this. And so when we get stressed and anxious, we will find it harder to fall asleep, and then we find it harder to sustain sleep, and get good quality sleep. So if we're sort of saying to our teenagers, you've got to be in bed for 10 or 10 o'clock, they're not going to be asleep. They can be in bed at that time, but they're not going to be asleep. And I think we probably, with younger kids, when I was a kid sleep practitioner, a parent of a 7-year-old, 6-year-old, 5-year-old that's not sleeping, that's a problem for the parent. I think often a teenager not sleeping is a problem. We don't know about it because they're just in their rooms, and they could be wide awake and we don't even know. so I think it is about having a little bit of empathy for them. So the worst thing we can do is make them go to bed earlier than the time that suits them. Now, when I talk to audiences of teenagers about this, they think what I'm saying. They translate this. James is saying that I can play my Xbox till 3:00 in the morning. That's what James just said. I've heard him. He said that, and that's not what I'm saying. I think we have a reasonable target of sleep time. If they're going to bed at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning now, even going to 11 o'clock is difficult. So what I would do as a practitioner, we'd start at that 1 o'clock that going to sleep. For the hour before that 1 o'clock, we'd build a wind down routine that worked for them, focusing on dropping our heart rate. So it would be around like what we're consuming. We might be putting some meditation in there. We might be doing things that help drop their heart rate in terms of like what they're watching. And we get them sleeping at 1 o'clock with that routine, and then we'd start to bring that time earlier. I would say for a teenager, I would never really go any earlier than 11 p.m. unless I'd established that their chronotype was the sleep type allowed that, and it's very rare for that to happen. I think as parents, we've got to accept our teenagers might be going to sleep later than us and going to bed later than us, because I think that's the hardest bit as a parent. I'm a sleep expert who has all this knowledge, and I still fall into parent mode of bit late here. You need to be going to bed. What are you doing? But I think he's having a conversation with my now. I think we can also take a moment to feel for my stepson that he was 10 when I came into his life with my ideas of not playing Xbox right up until bedtime. At first, he was not a fan of my work, if I am honest. But having the compassionate conversations, because I think sleep always benefits from compassionate conversations around how we can create a compromise that works. As work wonders, and that's our compromise. You can do what we have a bit of time for homework as you come in. You can do what you want in those couple of hours between that and wind down time. And wind down time is something, and we'll do it with him, because I think then that means that it creates a bit of family time and a bit of connection, which is always good. So I think it's just having that little bit of empathy and talking to schools as well, because I think this is a societal issue that won't change until we accept that school start times are too early. When I was at school, we got to school at 9 and finished and started lessons at 9:30. My stepson's getting to school. I think it's actually a bit later now, but there are people in school going at 8:30. That has just changed this year. It used to be 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock is too early for the teenagers to be starting school. I think with the sports that start early, it's slightly different. I think as you touched on it, I think we all can understand that starting training at 6 o'clock in the morning for a 15-year-old is not the best time. I'd argue for any of us, it's probably not because most people are more likely to be later in their sleep type than earlier in the general population. But that's sometimes when the pools are available. So I think we then need to recognise that. So some of the things we can do, making sure that because I would rather someone get up at 5:15 is falling asleep healthily at 11 and sleeping until 5:15 and getting 6 hours and 15 minutes of good quality sleep, than going to bed at 9:30, laying there until 1:30, having disturbed sleep until 5:15 and actually only getting 3 hours sleep. And that happens a lot. That is happening a lot. Using light to wake up, so you can get sunshine alarm clocks that rise like the sun. They are brilliant, because when you wake up with an audible alarm, you wake up with like a start, your adrenaline's pumping, and your body, you look around, it's still dark, still quiet, let's go back to sleep. And that snooze button syndrome, I like to call it, it's not a great way to wake up, particularly for a young athlete who then has got to go and train in an hour's time. So I often use a combination of sunshine alarm clock and then a light box. Designed for seasonal affective disorder, gives off a frequency of light that it mimics the sun. It helps the production of cortisol. It gets us awake. It starts to set the body clock as being early, and then that will mean within that young athlete's chronotype, because chronotype is not a set in stone. So I think the best way to think of chronotype in terms of going to bed and waking up is it's about a 90-minute window of when if you hit that 90-minute window, you're more likely to get better quality sleep. So 9:30. So for example, I'm a sort of early typical. 9:30 to 11 is my optimum sleep time. 5 till 6:30 is my optimum wake up time. If I hit between those two times, I generally feel better. So I could have 1 till 8, still 7 hours, but it's just because of my body, my body's natural rhythm. It doesn't work as well for me. So I think the more we can kind of like set that this is our wake up time early, then sleep time becomes easier to bring forward. But unfortunately, again, there's a lot of like sort of around sleep optimization, this idea that you can just like go to bed 3 hours early and you'll fall asleep. That's a very big jump for your body to start doing. Your body loves consistency when it comes to sleep. And again, for our young athletes who are maybe training 5 days a week and getting up at 5:15, when they then have a lie-in until 10, 11, or just, general, our teenagers want to have a lie-in till later on a day off, that then upsets the body's natural rhythm. A lie-in of about an hour and a half, 2 hours, most people's bodies can sustain. When it gets beyond that, you give yourself a form of social jet lag. So it starts to become very, very difficult for the body just gets confused. When am I going to sleep? When am I waking up? You're putting if you have those lie-ins for a long time at the weekend, your major organs are in shutdown mode for longer. That's why you often have inertia, so you sleep longer but feel worse. If you've ever sort of experienced that at the weekend, and there is some research to show that your organs being shut down for longer actually, it diminishes their efficiency at working. So the more we can be consistent with sleep, have a targeted sleep time that works with your teenager's body clock. Have a wind down time in that hour before that sleep time that is focused on dropping heart rate, being relaxed, dropping core temperature. Bath or shower is really good for dropping core temperature. And then in the morning, lots and lots and lots of light to try but they will not wake up singing. No, they will not wake up like this is a good day. They just won't. But it is sort of, again, it's that sleeping better, not perfect. That's the best we can do in that situation.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I just love that. I mean, we're ultimately saying not get too worked up and be too prescriptive around, sort of bedtime, but whenever that may be or it seems to fit, we're looking at that window prior to that to set the best environment. And then I'm guessing in the morning then also, as that light gradually rises, you're not going to get an instant wake up. So are you saying if you were getting up at 7 o'clock, that light and those clocks start coming on at 6? Are you saying
6, but half an hour before the clock coming on?
Half an hour before. Yeah.
Now there is a bit. So I'm very sensitive. So if I have one, me and my wife have one. She's quite a deep sleeper and a good sleeper. I'm a light sleeper and a poor sleeper. I'll wake up at 6:31. Where at 7, she will still need an alarm. So often you do still need an alarm, but you've come out of that. Like if I think owls are more prone to deep sleep later in the night. So if you are in sort of a deeper stage of sleep, the light will pull you out. The light dark cycle there's two systems that manage our sleep. There's a light dark cycle where in simple terms, if it's light, we're more likely to be awake. If it's dark, we're more likely to be asleep. And then there's a sleep pressure, which during the day, from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, you are getting sleepier. So think of it like hydration. The longer you go without hydration, the thirstier you get. The longer we out sleep, the sleepier you get. That's why sort of consistent wake up time leads to a consistent sleep time, because your body gets into that lovely natural rhythm. And we want to build that pressure. And building pressure is really, really important. This is where naps can be an interesting one, because naps can be really helpful for performance. They can create alertness, they can create productivity, but actually they can also steal that pressure if they are, for some people, if they had a nap at all. A late nap can steal that pressure. So, after school, for example, if a kid comes home and has a nap at 3:30, 4 o'clock, that's maybe a little bit too late. That might affect sleep at night. Napping too long. I've worked with plenty of young athletes who are coming home at 3, 4 o'clock and having a 2-3 hour nap. That's not a nap. That's a sleep at the wrong time. And that sleep at the wrong time will undoubtedly affect the quality of sleep at night, if not the quantity. It particularly can affect like deep sleep and that physical recovery.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. All about, I guess, setting, as you say, staying in the rhythm, finding a rhythm, something that works. Just on that, we've talked a lot about that golden hour, I guess, before bedtime, whenever it is, and obviously bringing down the heart rate, being clever about how you spend that final hour. What are some of the best things we can do? And as you say, I think it's nice that you said that doesn't mean watching the serial killer on the loose or the thing that's got a huge amount of stress attached to it. What should we be doing in that hour?
Well, one of the professional footballers I went with, he said to me the other day, went, James, I've tried that thing you said about listening to something, and I was listening to this true crime drama and it didn't work. It didn't work because you're really engaged with it. So it's those things that allow disengagement of the brain. So it could be something just that is funny. I think comedy is brilliant. It releases the right sort of endorphins. So a comedy series that particularly one you've seen before. So maybe people our age might be Friends, something like that. Big Bang Theory, Family Guy. It's looking at things like that can drop your heart rate. I think if your kids do meditation, if they are using things like Headspace and Calm, I think particularly I've found a lot of success with the sleep stories on Calm, because there's often the culturally relevant people to my young athletes who are telling the stories, and it gives them something to. It's what I always put is like when we're not sleeping, we often our mind's wondering. I wonder what I'm going to do tomorrow. I wonder. Oh, I forgot to do that thing. I wonder if I could do it now. Well, what we want is our mind to wander, because if you think when you fall asleep, it's them lovely like higgledy-piggledy thoughts you get where it's all a bit all out of sync and out of place, and then you fall to sleep, and that's what we're trying to do. So you can't actively sleep; you need to actively relax. That is different for every single person, but it is meditation, breathing exercises, acceptance. So, for example, night after an event, night after training, night after a game, we need to accept that sleep might be a little bit more difficult. And we might have to accept that we might have to wind down for a little bit longer. Now, if you're a poor sleeper, I'm genetically a poor sleeper. One of the strongest parts of my improvement in my sleep, I've not cured it. Anyone promising a cure, selling you snake oil. I've not cured it, but why I'm better is I accept that I'm a poor sleeper. That sometimes I will sleep poorly, but I'm fine because I always get through tomorrow. And again, if it's a big event tomorrow and we're supporting a young athlete, I think it's getting them to think about, that this night's sleep is not connected to your performance tomorrow, because your body can deal with poor night's sleep. Your body's amazing at dealing with it, and it will get you through tomorrow. And if we're getting it right the rest of the time, it's not a concern. So with the athletes that I work with, we don't focus on the night before. We accept the night after will be harder. Self-analysis, cortisol, adrenaline, caffeine, other stimulants that we're using to perform. Timing of event can affect that night after. But even if we struggle night before, night after, there's another five nights in that week, and that's 75% of the time. Get them right, that's 75%. That's enough. So I think sometimes with sleep, and this is where elite environments can be difficult, because I'm asking people who the whole life have been told, measure. If you don't measure it, you can't change it. You need to set goals. You need to get better at it. You need to try harder. If you do them things with sleep, you get worse. And I'm out. So a bit of it is work around the mindset around sleep. That it isn't the same as our training regimes. It isn't the same as our nutrition. It requires a better sense of feeling of what does good sleep feel like, a sense of what does sleepiness feel like, so we could understand our own bodies and start to work with our body's natural rhythm rather than fighting it.
Yeah, and I think there's an awful lot of people, I'm sure, find it really refreshing about how realistic you are around this topic. It's in my work, I often talk about, yes, I live and breathe this every single day, but oh my goodness, I mess up my sports parenting on a regular basis. I'm more aware of it. I hopefully make slightly better choices more of the time than I would have done. Am I going to get it right 100% of the time? No. Do I need to give myself a hard time about that? Probably not really, because that's the reality. And it's nice to hear, I guess, the support we're giving today is based around making simple changes that are possible, and trying to get them right most of the time. And if you do that, you're probably going to make an improvement from where you are today.
Yeah, that's it. That is it.
Brilliant. Final question for you, James. Sure, this could have been, this will be interesting to see how many we get after the podcast. If you had one, you're only allowed one. You're allowed one piece of advice. You can make it span out into a couple if you need to, but if a sports parent's listening tonight or today, you've got one piece of advice you can give them, helping support their young person with their sleep. How are we going to set them up? What we're going to start with?
So I'm gonna split into two, so I can do the two things that the sort of the mistakes that I see most of all when we are parenting our children around sleep, including, like you say, me. I think it's about giving sleep that importance, and I think so. The one way I think we can do that better is about conversations before bed around our performance. So if we've had a late training session, that's not the time for us to be analysing the performance in training, or if we've had late competition, analysing performance in training. If coaches are asking you to look at clips after performance and it's late, we need to be challenging that viewpoint. If we're not with our children and they are competing away from us, and we think that we have an inspiring message to give them before bed about the event tomorrow, that is the worst thing that you can do. I see it in my stepson. He plays like grassroots football, and the coaching staff of his team are constantly I think they think they're Al Pacino in Any Given Sunday, with some of the messages sent out at 10:30 in the evening. It's just not necessary, because all that does is, just as he's about to get to sleep, he's thinking about the game tomorrow, and that's where I don't want him thinking about the game tomorrow. So I think that'd be the one thing that I time and time again, working with young athletes, and if as a parents, what we can do is A, we're going to be too emotional often to have that conversation just afterwards, but B, you're ruining the sleep. And actually, if you've got a long commute home, which many of the young athletes that we work with do, that should be seen as part of the wind down time. So if I work with athletes where they're finishing training at 11 and they're 12 years old, that's hard. But if you get in the car and you put relaxing music on and you have an eye mask, and you even get in your pajamas before you get in the car, so as soon as you get home, you can go straight to bed. That helps. Again, the best we can do in that situation, for that hour drive, at least we're getting home at midnight and we're ready to go. We haven't spent an hour sort of discussing. That's because as parents, we're bad for this in around sport. What you did wrong, kid? What you did wrong? So I think there's that, and I think the other thing I would say, and I think this is as much to the athletes, the coaches, parents, is that your pillow, your duvet, your mattress are the three most important pieces of equipment you have for your sport after your sport, your equipment to play your sport, because recovery and sleep is about the sleep environment. Is about the stuff we've talked about, the stress, anxiety, the body clock. It's getting those things right, but the thing we often get wrong is what we're sleeping on and under. And I think, we need to not be sleeping on our front. If you've got a young athlete who's sleeping on their front, arms above their head, necks turned, 8 hours in an engaged position, they're fine at 13, 14. But when I'm working with them as a senior athlete in their late 20s, they are struggling. And in a lot of sports, your shoulders, don't want your shoulders and neck, struggling. So I think that is, we need to encourage our kids to sleep on their side. You can get body pillows that you can sort of hook, like maternity pillows that you sort of put between your legs. You get knee pillows that you can put between your legs. You need to make sure the pillow is supporting your head properly. Pillow's job is to fill the gaps between your head and the mattress. So on your side, it's your shoulder. On your back, it's the nape of your neck. And the mattress needs to be right. What we do as parents often, we'll buy a mattress at 5 and we expect that mattress to last until they're 18. So we need to make sure that they've grown a lot in that time. We need to make sure that the mattress they're using doesn't have to be expensive, but it has to support them. And just be very careful when buying mattresses. Lots and lots of brands that market at sports people are foam mattresses. Foam makes you hotter. It makes sleep more difficult. For me and the athletes I work with, I like to see springs. I like to see natural fillings, because the foam products often just create too much heat in the sleep environment. And I think, unfortunately, they're the mattresses that do market at athletes, and a lot of athletes end up on the wrong mattress because of that marketing.
Wow, James Wilson, my goodness, what an incredible episode. It'll be interesting to see how many questions we get and how many more questions you get from this as our listeners listen to this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. It'd be amazing to have you on again, or doing something with us at some point in the future.
I would love to.
Yeah, we'll certainly explore that. But thank you for joining us on this episode of the Parents in Sport podcast.
Thank you. Sleep well.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.